guys, welcome to the third webinar. Today we're going to talk about a bit of anatomy and of the lower body, and we'll have a few common injuries that you can obtain doing sports or in everyday life on your lower limbs. So on the first slide we can see the anatomy of the thigh, and there's concentrate also on the knee joint, and many of us already know the major muscle that we have on our legs, on our thighs. The main one is the quadriceps. It's basically a muscle composed by 4 different muscles and then combined together into the knee joint through the patellar ligament. The first picture on our left, we can see the inside of the knee joint, where we can recognize the anterior and posterior cruciate ligament, and we can see the meniscus, both the lateral and the medial. And on the side, in green, we can see the collateral, the 2 collateral ligaments. And so we know that the meniscus and both the anterior cruciate and the posterior are part of the intercapsular, they're part of the inside of the capsula of the joint, and both lateral and medial collateral are extracapsular ligaments. But we know that the medial collateral ligament has a very strong relationship with the medial meniscus. In fact, most of the time that we have an injury on the medial collateral ligament, we usually have also an injury on the medial meniscus. So, what is important to know about this joint and about the muscle that are involved in this joint? Basically, the quads are the muscle that we mostly use during our deambulation and also when we run. So they're very important for any of us that do sport. And it is important to know that we need to have, as we said in the first webinar, a good relationship between the agonist and antagonist muscles. So in this case, for example, most of the injuries to the knee joint, they usually are related to the poor ratio between hamstrings and quadriceps. So if we follow the second picture on the left, on the bottom, we can see why it is important. So we can actually see it's well represented, the ratio between the quadriceps and the hamstrings in the knee joint. Why? Because they both basically insert on the tibia bone, so that's the bone of your shin, and they both apply a force on the tibia, and what basically happens is that the tibia can slip from back to forward depending on the strength of the quadriceps or the strength of the hamstrings. So most of the time when we have an injury on the knee, especially on the ACL and sometimes meniscus and collateral, but especially for the ACL, so the anterior cruciate ligament, most of the time the injury is due to very low strength of the hamstring. Why? Because the hamstring basically pulls the tibia backwards, so it helps the ACL. It doesn't, in any movement, it doesn't bring the ACL to rupture because it doesn't bring him under tension. So, for example, when we jump or when we're landing after a jump, if the quadriceps are, if the ratio hamstrings quadriceps, it's not good. Most of the time, the quadriceps brings forward the tibia, and so it pulls the ACL. So what do we know about injuries on the knee? We know that most of the injuries are higher in females, especially in younger ages. So between 16 and 18, usually it's like the highest rate of injuries on the ACL. Basically, and what they're trying to explain is that the relationship between the hip and the knee position grade usually doesn't help. And also, and this can be overtaken, of course, girls tend to have less power or total strength in those ages in relationship to compared to males. So it is very important to keep up the hamstrings quads ratio if we want to avoid any kind of injury, especially on the ACL. A good way to work on your hamstrings, it's the Norwegian curl that we can see the picture on the right. Why? Because it actually, since it's a negative eccentric movement, it follows more or less what happens to our hamstring, so to our legs, when we land or when we brake and change direction. I know it's a very difficult exercise. It needs a lot of strength, so I recommend to start doing other exercises first, and then when you feel that you can actually do a couple of these repetitions, this is probably the best one you can do to avoid any kind of injury on the knee. So let's see together the mechanisms of the injuries. For the ACL, we said that most of the injuries, of course, happen during landing from a jump, change of direction, and during a break. So if you're running and you want to stop, most of the time the injury happens there. And of course, if there's no external factor that acts on the knee, of course. So we can see on the left, we have the position of safety and the position of risk. The position of risk, basically, it's knee and valgus, so the knee falls in, and with the foot that it's basically on the floor and it can't be moved. Most of the time this happens during a change of direction or after a jump, where we're not contracting and working well with the legs. So most of the time our legs just falls to the center, and if we're not strong enough, especially on the hamstring, usually the foot can be moved and the knee just falls in, and most of the time we basically break the anterior cruciate ligament. For the posterior cruciate ligament, usually it's more difficult to break it because most of the movement that we do usually tend to bring our body and our knee on valgus. But we can see the different mechanism of injury. So we have direct kick for the football player or for the Can I ask the other people to switch off the microphone, please? Thank you. So we said direct hit on the tibia. So what happens during PCL? Basically, the tibia goes backwards, and most of the time the PCL breaks during this movement. So we can see also in the hyperextension injury, the footballer is missing a ball, so the foot goes forward, and basically the head of the tibia goes backwards. On the fall onto flexed knee with foot in plantar flexion, what happens? All the body just basically goes on the head of the femor's bone, and in this case, the tibia is fixed on the ground, so the femur goes forward and low, and we break the PCL. So now let's go to the other muscle. So we spoke about the quadriceps and the hamstrings quadriceps ratio. Now we go to the gluteus. The gluteus is basically one of the biggest muscles that we have on our body, and it's very important. Why? Because the gluteus is actually the muscle that it's the main muscle that makes us stand, walk uphill, and climb the stairs. We know that we have 3 glutes, so we have the maximum, the medium, and the minus. From this picture, we can't see the minus because it's below the medius. And also indicate here the antagonist of the glutes that we spoke about, the antagonist and agonist during the first webinar. And these are the iliopsoas, that it's a deep muscle that works basically when we lift our legs, having the hips fixed on the ground, for example, when we do a flutter kick. And then the rectus femoris. The rectus femoris is part of the quadriceps, but it's the only muscle of the quadriceps that actually crosses the hips. So it actually flexes the thigh on the hips. So now we go down to the actual leg. Most of us call them shins. And we see the main muscle that we have that actually work during the ambulation. So on the back, we can see on the left picture the gastrocnemius and the soleus. That are actually the main muscle that compose the back of our shin, the back of our leg. And then in the front, we recognize the major one, that it's the tibialis anterior and peroneus longus. And of course, then there's the others, the extensor digitorum longus, that actually extend the toes, and the peroneus brevis. Most of us know about the shin splints, especially the runners. Why? Because sometimes with overuse, so if we run a lot, and especially if we run on concrete or hard surfaces, we may get the shin splints. They can be anterior or posterior. Usually when it's anterior, it's basically the peroneus brevis and the tibia anterior that actually are inflamed, and their insertion and origin on the tibia, on the bone, and it's really painful. And on the posterior shin splint, it's the same thing. So it's an inflammatory process of the insertion and the origin of the soleus in this case for the posterior. And usually it's a painful process that happens, as I said, with overuse or when we run a lot on hard surfaces. On the right, we can see the different kind of ankle sprain. The most common one is the inversion. It's easier to actually have that kind of injury. For the inversion, usually we have an injury on the lateral compartment of the ligaments of the ankle, and sometimes it can be associated with an injury on the metatarsus. So that's the beginning of our pinky toe. Most of the time, an inversion is actually associated with a broken toe. Then we have the inversion that is like more difficult to get, and the most dangerous one is the high ankle sprain, because most of the time it's associated with actual broken bones on the ankle of the fibula and tibia. And most of the people in Rome remember when Francesco Totti broke his ankle, he had a total inversion of an high ankle sprain, basically. So what should we do when we have an injury like that? So the main thing you have to remember is these words. We're gonna call them RICE. That is rest, ice, compression, and elevation. So it's rest, ice, compression, and elevation. Why? Because basically we have to rest even for a small inversion, or for shin splints. We have to apply ice. Usually it's between 5 to 20 minutes each time we apply ice, for 2-3 times a day, especially after training. Compression. Why? Because once you get injured, especially on your ankles, the only thing you have to do, and you have to remember every time you work out, is to brace your ankles before any training or competition. And then elevation. So if we want to avoid the swelling, we just pull our legs up and apply ice. So what else can we do? After training, we can massage our legs, going from the bottom to the top, and ice treatments, as I said before. And remember always to warm up well and stretch before and after the training. So now let's see together a couple of exercises that we could do at home, and I'm gonna share a video that I hope everybody can see. Marco, can you tell me if you can see the video?
Yes. You please start. Yes.
Yes, perfect. Okay. So here's a few exercises that we can do at home. Let's start. So this is the flutter kick that we talked about. In this case, we're working on basically iliopsoas and recto femoralis. And the abs in this case are fixing the hips. So in this case,
Wait, Alex, I can see the video. I cannot see. It's like black screen.
Okay, let me check. What about now?
Black screen again. Maybe now. Try to play. No. I see only your black screen.
Nothing?
I saw the player, but it's a black screen again.
Okay, I actually can see the video. I don't understand why you can't, and I shared it. So let me see. Can you see it? Yes, sir.
I'm seeing your library.
È
Yeah,
zoomato?
can you see though?
È zoomato, Alex.
No. Huh. What about now?
Try to play the video. I see the player, but I don't know if you can see the video.
Does it work?
I see the timer, but oh yes, now yes.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so as we said, the first exercise, interrupt me if you can't see it, okay? The first exercise, this one is called Flutter Kicks. Basically, we're working on our rectofemoris and iliopsoas, and not on our abs. On our abs, in this case, are isometrically fixing the hips so we can lift our leg. Same thing here, Flutter Kicks. Then we go on abduction of the leg. This is a good exercise for your glutes. Laying down and just give us more range of movement. Then this is an abduction, so we work on an internal thigh on the adductors. Same thing when we do stuff laying down. In this case, it gives us just more range of movement. But we can also work sitting up. We have less range of movement in this case. Then we have the glutes bridges. We've done these so far during the HIIT classes, if we follow the HIIT classes. And then the one leg glutes bridges. We have what a lot of people call donkey kick. It's just an extension of the thigh. And then another work on the adductors. This exercise applies a little bit more weight than the other one, than the one we saw before. Okay, this is a good exercise if you want to work on eccentric strength. Usually if you have a PCL injury, you shouldn't do this one. But if your knees are okay, this is actually really good, especially on the quadriceps, the medial and lateral main muscle of the quadriceps. Okay, now let's go to the multi-articular exercises. This exercise is simply a squat, but you have to remember to keep your feet pointing out, and the knees that I'm pointing out here has to follow. The knee has to follow the foot. So when you go down, you go towards towards outside with your knee. Especially if you have an injury on the ACL, this is very important. You have to push your knees out as much as you can. Same thing from the side. Another important thing before we go forward is the position when we're down here. We want our butt to go as back as we can so that our knee won't go over the feet too much, over the toes too much. So our butt has to go out and backwards. So this is a fixed position for the lunges. I don't really like too much this exercise, but a lot of people do this. The important thing is remember to keep the weight forward when we go up and down. This is a front lunge. So we go front and back like this. Starting from the back, we just take a step forward. It's very good, especially if we want to work on the eccentric part of the movement, because we basically fall forward and we basically stop our body from falling. This is a reverse lunge. This is probably one of the best exercises we can do, and it's very safe for the knee. And we can concentrate most of the work on the front leg in this case, and push less with the back leg. Okay, this is a reverse lunge runner style, so we lift our leg up when we go forward. Why? Because we want to involve the retrofemoralis in the movement. So we do this movement here to actually activate the retrofemoralis and the iliopsoas. Okay, this is an exercise that you can do to actually, if you want to warm up, or if you actually want to do like a continuous workout on your legs. You just have to remember to switch legs. It's a good exercise to actually make your heart rate go up. This is a sumo squat or deadlift. You can actually apply more strength on this if you hold something on your hand. Same thing when we go down. If you see the knees are actually pointing out, so following the feet. You don't have to fall in with the knees, especially if you have an injury on the ACL. So now we're going to see the same exercise from the side. So same thing. We should push our butt as back as we can and try not to go too much forward with the knees. So this is another exercise. So it's a side-to-side lunge. I suggest for people with ACL and medial collateral injuries to not do this exercise in the previous one, because we see in this position the knee is actually in valgus. So if we have an ACL injury, we can actually feel the pain. But this exercise is actually really good because in this position the glutes is actually stretched out. So we need to apply more strength to get him back in position. Okay, this is a squat jump. So for any one of you that actually have good strength in the legs, this is a good way to apply more strength on each movement. And then we have the split squats. This is actually a good exercise if we have balance. And then we go on the ankle. So this is an extension of the foot. This is a very good, especially if we have to work on our calves or if we're doing rehab on the ankle. It can be monopodalic. And then we have a flexion of the foot. And then we're going to do flexion and extension together. Okay. We'll go back to the presentation. So we saw a couple of things that we could do at home while we're in quarantine. I hope it was helpful for most of you. If you have any question, don't hesitate to ask, and also just send us an email to our JSU Athletics department. I hope you all enjoyed this third webinar, and remember to follow our blog and our YouTube channel to stay updated with what we're doing and learn more about training and anatomy of exercise. And thank you very much. If you have any question, just turn your mic on and let me know.
Thank you, Alex.
No questions? Okay, thank you very much for follow the webinar. I'll see you next week for another episode. and have a nice day.